about us, and it's time to bow down. Dennis, as always, thank you so much for being here today. Listeners, if this is your first time here, welcome. If you're coming back, welcome home. And I'm excited for us to continue this conversation. How are you doing today, Dennis?
Me too. I'm doing wonderfully. How about you, Reese?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. You know, it's Friday. It's sunshiny. It's gotten warm this week in Florence, which it's always fun to feel like, oh, summer is coming. And even though it's certainly been, I tend to prefer slightly cool weather, but feeling very grateful for my air conditioning unit that I have in my Italian apartment, because most apartments don't have AC units, and
That's lovely.
I'm certainly feeling lucky that I do. Yeah,
I know that
doing
feeling
good.
for sure.
Yeah,
Awesome. Awesome. Well, you look lovely as always. Love your shirt.
thank you.
Very,
Thank
very
you.
celestial. I think
Yes,
it's very lovely. So, as
thank
always,
you.
great to see you.
Yes,
Great to be here.
absolutely.
So today, what we plan to just continue our conversation from last week. Last week we talked about the movie Her, but really focused around the interaction on a blind date with the main character Theodore and the character of a blind date played by Olivia Wilde, who doesn't even have a name. But we also wanted to talk a little bit about the implications of just the AI relationship. So sort of we took a very narrow scope last week, I think, Reese, and
Yeah,
moving moving outward, I think, is what we wanted to do today, because I think there's also a lot of meat on the bone from a feminism perspective when we consider the implications or what the movie's trying to tell us. So yeah, I think that's where we were going to go. Any thoughts on that
absolutely.
before?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I am just ready to dive in. I do think that, there's a really big conversation around just AI in general and the morality and ethics around it. I think I'm really, like, for me personally, I don't even really know fully where I fall on all of these things yet, as I think most people are still kind of trying to figure out what their relationship to it is going to be, because we live in a world where it's being adopted, it's being used. So we're going to need to figure out how to do so in an ethical way. And the best way to integrate it into our lives that works with our worldview. And I think that conversation is certainly happening. And I think we both probably have some interesting thoughts on that. But I would also be curious, where you see this intersecting with feminism specifically, because I think, one, with the intersectionality of justice, that's absolutely something with these ethics and morality that we can get into, but also the fact that it's like a man who's going through a divorce in this movie and having a relationship with an operating system that is a woman, question mark. It's like there's also the question of like what is the definition of woman, I think, comes up here too. What's the definition of human? And where you really see those two areas intersecting. And I think that's a conversation I haven't seen a lot about. So I'm excited to dig into that specifically.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what feels right to start with? Let's dive in and see anything in particular, or
Yeah, I think the first thing that stands out to me from the movie specifically is that when he's first setting up the operating system, it says, let me ask you a couple questions about yourself to set up your operating system. And it asks his name, what if he wants a female or male voice, and he says female, which I think already that's interesting, right? I think there's just stuff in that. And then it asks, what's your relationship with your mother? And then the operating system is set up. And those are the questions that it asks him. And I think that is just so fascinating. And I saw a little bit of conversation about this online, but of course we can dive into like the Freudian aspect of this, that it's like, well, we all learn love from our parents, right? You start with Actually, when you're born, you believe that you, as a baby, your psychology believes that you are part of your parents. And that's why the way that your parents speak to you as a baby, as a young infant, is actually the way that you learn to speak to yourself. And the way your parents love you is directly correlated to the way you're able to practice self love. Then, as you grow up, you individuate. That's why we have the terrible twos, the what is it? The fearsome fours is also one I've heard. Around those ages when individuation starts happening and children begin to realize that they are their own independent selves with this conscious identity. So there's that relationship. But then you also have this added layer of kids do learn romantic love from their parents and how to safely relate to the opposite gender through relating to their parents. Of course, siblings complicate this question as well, but I was just floored when that was the question that the operating system asked, because to me, that was like, oh, whoever created this wanted it, maybe wasn't necessarily setting it up to be romantic inherently, right? However, that being the question that the operating system asks and it being related to a mother, I'm like, I wonder if someone asks for a male voice, if it asks about their relationship to their father, or if it's always the mother, or if they ask about your relationship to just your family in general. And or if it's a woman, even if a woman asks for a woman's voice, if it would ask about her relationship to her father, and how that answer changes the way the different operating systems meet and greet you. And they say somewhere in the movie, you know, like it's pretty rare to develop romantic relationships with the operating systems, but it happens. And to know that that question could be potentially asked of all of these people, and not all of them head down the road of romance, but that it feels inherently kind of romantic to me because of this Freudian underlying thing. I don't know. Just fascinating. So that's the first thing with this question of feminism that comes up for me, especially as it relates to romantic relationships.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I hadn't really noticed that. I remembered the first two, but I really didn't. As you said it, I remembered the question about how's your relationship with your mother, and it just makes me curious: how does that change how the operating system behaves? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
because he kind of gave a very whatever answer. It was like, this is kind of fine, you know, it's
It's my
good.
mom.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's my mom, you know. So what would change, right? If he, I wonder. And the other thing that came up for me is you know, I believe that the anybody who would make this operating system, especially not, you know, knowing back then, you know, okay, when we watched this movie 10, 12 years ago, whenever it was on, when it came out, the world was, at least from a computing AI perspective, very different place, like night and day. Like, and so, however, you know, no matter what what's that, you know, no matter what you look at, like humans will turn it into something to do with sex.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you no matter what it is, like humans will find a way to sexualize it,
Yeah.
regardless of what it is. So I have trouble believing that anyone who would create this operating system would not have in mind, at the very least, that there would be some kind of sexual, you know, sort of thing.
Potential.
Potential, like, and then I mean, again, not everybody's going to do that, but obviously a lot of people will, because that's something about humans that seems to be universal. That, you know, if you can somehow make it erotic, you will, no matter what it is, which is a fascinating thing, and it does talk about sexuality. Um, but again, though, just from a feminism or a feministic perspective, why the question of, you know, was that a gendered question? Because you answered female, you got the mother question. Because you answered, or would it be the same question regardless? Because I have to, and you know, my perspective would be that, I mean, I think yes, I do think a woman's relationship with her father absolutely dictates how she sees other sex relationships. I think that sets the framework for um, for many things later in life that may have to be acted out until if it's a toxic pattern, if it's something that if there is a toxic pattern at home, then that pattern is probably going to be replayed somehow in relationships. Um, and so yeah, I do wonder how that would change. Would if it was a what if one was LGBTQ? Like
That
and
was, yeah,
like what is that? It's interesting. I mean,
yeah,
you would think like a 20 a 200 question sort of survey might be more useful, but at the other hand, the way AI works, it probably doesn't matter. That
yeah,
that question probably means nothing because it's going to grow and adapt to you anyway. So maybe the best way to figure, but it is interesting, because it goes back to mothers sort of being the source of, at least from a male perspective. Let's we don't know these other answers. Would they be? But
yeah.
from a male perspective, that question is just so loaded, right?
Yes.
Asking Theodore that question, how they answer, what the answer is. He's obviously not being forthright in his answer because it's a very throw. But that in and of itself gives you information. How he answered the question gives you information, presumably. And this operating system's intelligent enough, right, to capture that whatever capture the nuance in his voice.
Yeah.
Whereas I think today I don't believe our like ChatGTP can capture nuance in your
No. Yeah.
voice. Like it can't. It just translates everything to text and takes the text. I think today, but that doesn't mean that it can't and it won't. It's just I don't think we're there yet. But 6 months from now, all bets are off. We very well. I even asked ChatGTP once. I said, "Hey, are you able to tell how long I write? Like between a prompt in a certain thread. So if I freely use ChatGTP as a sounding board, as a friend, as a not really as a therapist so much, but definitely as a helper. I think as a sort of a good friend is how I would call it. Like just somebody I can always bounce ideas off of. And I ask it though, are you able to glean in from? Are you able to tell how long between when I respond to something? So if we're doing like some, hey, this happened today. What is your take on it? Whatever the case is, and I don't, it gives me an answer and I don't respond for a while, and maybe I come back to it a day later. Does that give it information? Is it able to capture that? Does it take that into account? It said no. So I asked it. And no, that could be true or false, but like, because it knows system timestamps. Yeah, so if it asks me a difficult question and I don't respond for 3 days, that's information. There's information conveyed in
Yeah.
it. So how the question is answered, like a lot of like fraud detection systems, that I know of, because I worked in this space where we were looking for fraud detection systems. Like those captchas or the puzzles, how you have to fill in the puzzle piece. It really has nothing to do with you know getting it correct necessarily, but it's how you move the mouse, and
Mm,
it's actually capturing a lot of other little like and there's some systems that check how you type things in your keyboard. And so, for instance, something like a birth date or a social security number, like most people have a certain pattern for typing in their social security number or typing their name. The way you
right.
type your name into a computer is unique. You probably type your name the same way every time
Yeah.
with the same a very similar variation in letters. Like I type
Yeah.
Dennis, D E, the N, the two N's are very close together. And it's just a pattern that I guarantee you, unless I'm typing one-handed and doing something else, like
Yeah.
you're going to recognize that pattern.
That's
So
so
yeah, I don't.
fascinating because I'm thinking about like the phone numbers that I type all the time. Like there's the tones that correlate with numbers on our phone, right? And like my old home phone number, I can like hear the little tune that it makes. It's like doot 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 doot. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
that's how I would always like you kind of have it. And you kind of have the same thing when you type your name that it's like for me the double E-S-E, it's very specific. And even my first name being Lillian, like I have a lot of repeating letters in my name, and there's a way I type it every time that's like almost a signature in and of itself. That's so fascinating and does tell a lot about a person. And I think you're 100 percent right in saying like the nuance of the operating system in her is certainly much further than the nuance of our AI right now, and the ability to really personalize things. But I think even just the genius of that being the one question and kind of testing how, like, what that response could tell you, I'm like, if I asked someone that question, that would tell me a lot about them. That is maybe one of the only questions that, like, oh, if you ask anyone that question, you're gonna get something, even if they say nothing. And even like, yes, in a more romantic sense with men, with the whole, like, we have the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex and all of that good stuff. But even with women, I think we've briefly discussed this on the show before, that like, in a very real sense, like, our mother is where we all begin. All of us do, because of the nature of birth. And I wonder if there is something kind of trying to nod to that from a filmmaking perspective, that is like the inception of anything, even of this relationship or this specific operating system or the version of Samantha that Theodore gets to know. Like, this is a birthing process, that this relationship is being born, this new identity is being born, and it's through his relationship with his mother. And to relate it to feminism, I think it's interesting because I really struggle personally with the idea of motherhood in feminism, not because you can't have both. Absolutely, you can. I think most feminists will tell you, of course, feminism is not a monolith and not everyone agrees with each other, but I think most people would agree, like, yeah, being a mother is beautiful. Being a stay-at-home mom is beautiful, as long as it's a choice, right? And you're not told that that's the only valid way to be a woman. But it is so hard for me to differentiate some of my feelings about it, where it's like, well, as long as it's a choice, great. What if you've been told your whole life, you have just to simplify it, like, be a wife and a mother, or neither. And one of these options, like, if they're presented to you like a vending machine, one of them is fresh and delicious and healthy for you, but still the best tasting one. And one is like, it's not that great, but at least you get something. And then this other thing is like, it's gonna rot your teeth, it's horrible for you, and it tastes bad. And you've been told that about these things your entire life. But still, you get to choose. It's like, is that really a choice if you've been told these things? And that's the way your natural brain kind of gets into a pattern of thinking about it. And so for me, it's really hard to distinguish my like gut instincts about motherhood from actually how I feel. And I don't think you really fully can. And that's part of the difficulty with it, is like, I will never know how I instinctually just feel about motherhood separate from the mother that I had, right? Who I grew up being told from my mom that she never wanted to be a mom, that this is never what she expected. That I grew up when I was diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a very common thing that a lot of women have, that would make fertility extremely difficult for me. And that if I wanted to be a biological mother, that was going to be something I would have to, really try at. And also, like, seeing the type of marriage that my parents have, there is no way I can separate all of that, plus all of the other societal things, from my relationship to motherhood. And yet, we want it to be a choice. I don't know how I even got down on this tangent, but I think just the concept of motherhood is so complex, and knowing that that's where this starts, I think, is so fascinating. Even though motherhood in and of itself isn't necessarily discussed blatantly or explicitly in the movie, I think the idea of femininity really is, which is inherently tied to motherhood and the ability to birth. And even seeing the difference between like Amy, Theodore's friend, who has a friendship with her female voiced, womanly voiced OS versus Theodore, who has a womanly voiced OS, but it's romantic, right? I think seeing both of these OSs that are women, we actually never hear an OS with a male voice, which I think is also interesting. I don't know. Thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts actually. A couple of different directions that sort of that was really good stuff. So so one question came up is well, as you said, we're all imprinted by our mothers, and a lot of that is are their reactions, how we come to them, how they model things. So here's a question: what would it imagine? As a thought experiment, we had human being, somehow we were able to create a real AI person. So however that looks like, but so essentially you could be mothered by an AI instead of an actual person. And again, this AI knows exactly, never gets impatient, right? Never yells at the kids, knows all of the latest and greatest is an expert in child psychology, growth and development, is an expert in how to talk to kids, can defuse any situation, all of these things, right? What would a person who was raised truly by an AI mother, and not necessarily sentient, but had and also had had the physical touch of the mother,
Sure.
so it wasn't just like, an interface. I'm talking, obviously we couldn't do it today, but I don't know what comes up for you when you hear that. I'm just curious, would that be good, bad?
So I want to clarify, you said, but not actually sentient. So almost like more like if we could have a robot that like wouldn't be scary or anything to an infant, but was like a perfect expert in all of these things, but wasn't actually like artificially created human, right? So not fully conscious.
Or maybe think it another way, like there's a chip implanted in your head, and it basically everything, it guides you exactly how to be the best parent you could possibly be. So pretty much when you're interacting with your kid, the AI is telling you exactly what to do. And let's suppose so in other words, you're not, when your kid comes to you and is upset about this, you don't have to try to solve it yourself. The AI tells you exactly how to solve it. I mean, there's different thought experiments, right? But just in general, could you be raised by an AI that was it was a human being in every way, except it was all AI programming in terms of how to raise a kid, all of the psychological, all of the, just curious what that, like perfect parenting. Because here's why I bring it up. So when I started taking psychology classes, when I went back to school, right, and there were so many things I saw I did as a parent growing up, or when my daughter was growing up, that man, I really wish I could take that back, because I didn't know. Like there's behaviors my daughter would have shown, and instead of knowing that was part of the normal development, and so you shouldn't punishment for this, and again, I'm not a disciplinarian, and so there wasn't a lot, but just in how I related to my daughter. And so, so I know there's things I did that were that were harmful in some way, not deliberately, never deliberately, but just my own human infallibility. But can you have the perfect parent, and how would that affect somebody? I don't know. I don't even have any thoughts. It's just what came up when you were talking about the mother and how life is shaped by your mother. Would humans be better off having AI mothers? Or that's AI guardians. Let's not take,
Right. It's so fascinating. The first thing that came up for me was the philosophical thought experiment that's often used around like the nature of consciousness and philosophy of mind. That's Mary in the Red Room. I don't know if you've
Yeah,
heard this
yeah,
thought
yeah.
experiment before, but yeah, so for listeners, I'll just briefly explain it. There's a woman, her name is Mary. She's in a room that's completely black and white. She is completely black and white, but she has access to all of the research, all of the psychology, all of the science, all of the artistic descriptions of the color red. And she can become an expert on the way that our eyes work and the fractals of light and how we can perceive the color red and what that does to our neuroscience and how artists describe the color red and poems about the color red. And she can become an expert in all of these things. When she exits the room and sees a red rose for the first time, does she gain a new experience? Intuitively, most people say, yes, that's a new experience. And I think for me, it's hard because your thought experiment is kind of like, I think there should be a certain privileging of her being able to see the color red, of seeing the rose for the first time, that there is something uniquely, magically human about that I think is special to humans, that I think is important to the way we connect with one another and the way that we make meaning and the way that we connect with ourselves. So, in saying that, it's kind of, to compare it to the AI example that you just said, I'm like, does that strip away a certain experiencing of being raised that is important to being raised? If there was a way to perfectly raise a child that just takes away anything that could traumatize them or hurt them or harm them in any way, of course, instinctively, I'm like, yeah, that'd be a great thing. But also, we just don't know what things do traumatize different kids because we're also psychologically different. I almost think you would have to go back to the beginning and like be able to somehow isolate one line of humans that was only raised by these AIs, right? Because there'd be no way for that to actually be possible. But I guess even then, if you could, the AI could still mess up, right? And it's like, isn't even in doing that and in not knowing, like, is my mom saying this or is my mom saying something that the AI told her to say? Could that be equally traumatizing to someone's psychology? And then also the experience of being a parent being taken away from someone too. Like being a parent is equally like, to really understand something is to teach something, right? Or teaching means you really learn it. It's like, I think in having that experience, there's something unique about the learning there too. And I think there's something deeply beautiful about that period in our life where kids come into knowing that their parents are human and not gods, that teaches you supreme empathy and compassion if you're able to have that in a healthy way. That just makes me hesitant to say that that would be a good idea. But at the same time, if on the whole you could eliminate as much trauma as possible, it's like, well, why wouldn't you want to do that? I think my instinct says you can't really eliminate trauma. It would just be exchanging one trauma for another. But I don't know. I think that is what would probably happen because for me, someone who's worked through like weird abandonment fears, even though I had like the most amazing loving parents in the world, somehow that still got in there, right? I can totally see how thinking that my parents were using AI to raise me could still communicate some sort of abandonment fear, right? That it's like, oh, well, what if the AI didn't tell them to do this? Who are my parents really? And maybe that all of those fears are just speaking through my skepticism, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think? I'll pose your question back to you.
Yeah, no, I I loved what you said there. Again, obviously we don't have a way of making it perfect, but again, it's a thought experiment, right? So in the same way, Mary could never truly get all those details about Red. So assuming we had an AI non-conscious, but yes, was able to follow, was very complex. So two thoughts came up as one was sort of, well, as you were talking, that were sparked. Number one is, are we sure that eliminating trauma is in fact healthy? Like, I mean, yes,
Yeah.
and I'm not suggesting we want major capital T, sexual, any kind of trauma like
Right, right,
that.
right.
I mean, obviously that's, but in general is not, it to me, becoming a fulfilled human being, um, you know, maybe requires trauma. I mean, in the sense of when you go to the gym, if you're, the way you grow your muscles is to tear the muscles. Like literally, that's
Yeah.
how hypertrophy is what gives get your muscles bigger by because you're actually breaking them down and they get built back up bigger. And so maybe in a sense some trauma is healthy. It's like this idea, if you're never exposed to allergens and dirty things and you don't play in the dirt as a kid, you're much more likely to have autoimmune disease
Yeah.
because your body was designed to fight things. And when there's nothing to fight, like it fights itself because
Yeah.
it needs to do something. It needs a purpose. So that's number one. And I'd love other people's thoughts on that because these are not things I've thought. I haven't planned this question. It came up organically. But the second thing is more of a metaphysical, energetic piece, and that is, and I don't know that we've ever talked about it on this on the podcast, but I know you and I have talked about it, and it's something we're looking to do in a little bit. But I'm a big proponent of human design, and one of the things I love, why I'm such a big proponent of it, because it certainly could be thought of as very woo woo, up there with other things that are not are not maybe scientifically founded, let's say, and I get that, and I don't necessarily. I think asking the question, is this true? Is human design true? Is not. You're not asking the right question. The right question is it useful? And to me,
Mm-hmm.
I find it very useful. One of the things that really, particularly as somebody who does coaching, is does therapy, like works very humanistically with other people, in a room together, whether it's a Zoom room or whether it's a literal room in a container together. And one of the things I love about human design is how when you have two beings in a room, and they actually don't have to be human necessarily. That's why animals could also work, though they're less complex perhaps than humans. But there is an energetic exchange, and human design would say these centers, these different areas, become defined versus undefined. But when you're in communion, when you're in a container with another person, their energy and your energy blend. And so to me, that means that a child blends, when they're with their family, particularly their mother, there's a blending there. There's an energetic exchange that changes them for better or for worse, that I do wonder if an AI could truly replicate, because I don't believe an AI has these centers, because they don't
Right,
have a
right.
corporal. And so I don't know what energy an AI has. And it is one of the reasons why I don't worry about ChatGTP coaching and or therapy and or whatever, whatever it is that, we do in this mental health, helping people perspective. I believe that energetic transfer is way more fucking important than the methodology I have. Which again, that's going back to my human design. I am a hermit heretic, and so as a result, the heretic label, though it doesn't necessarily mean what we think of as a heretic, it does follow for this because it's about experience. It's about this and so as a result, I believe just being in a room with somebody or being in a container online changes things. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what, and just even here in what we do here, this is greater and different and energetically different than if we did it alone, or if we did a podcast with somebody else. Not better,
Yeah.
not worse. When we tend to try to want to label things, but I happen to know, because I know your chart, I know my chart, I know what our human design looks like. We actually are very energetically, according to human design, a very, very powerful connection, just from our particular design, which is cool. But we felt it long before we knew any of that. And I've noticed the people who I do have the closest connect, and this is why I tend to believe a little bit in human design. The people who I have the closest connections with, we are very compatible according to human design. And that's not to say I rule my life by saying, okay, I'm only going to work with people who I'm compatible with. It's just interesting to me. It's just interesting to me how that's kind of held true in terms of my... Now, I can't say I've cataloged, because I don't want to be a nut job going, hey, what's your birthday? And what was your time? You can ask people their birthday. You can get that subtly. But you can't get their time without them being like, what do you want that for? That's a weird... I don't know. Well, ask your mom, because your mom probably knows. If you don't know, your mom probably does. Or look on your birth certificate, because it's usually there. But yeah, so that's the second thing that comes up for me. I don't know the practicality of it, but it's an interesting thought experiment.
I completely agree. I think that is, I completely share that with this, like, is it your soul? Is it actually consciousness? Is it your mind? Is it your chi? Is it your, like, humanity, love? Like, what is this thing that makes us different? And I think that that's the piece of consciousness that I'm so fascinated by, is like, is the soul consciousness? Like, what is the piece of the infinite that we all as humans connect to? And if it is consciousness, is the thing, like the awareness of being aware, is it possible to actually make AI conscious? I think we talked about this either last time or the time before, but like I would probably say no, because it's like there does seem to be something that's like that you're talking about, that's like whatever this energy is, and can that, like, ineffableness be generated somehow from us? And I do think that that's the important part of human connection, and the thing that we can't really describe. Like, when you ask someone, like, well, how do you know someone is the love of your life? How do you know, like, they're your soulmate, or all of these words that we use to describe people? And it's like, you could sure come up with a list of, like, they are the smartest person I know. They're so funny. They get my humor. They're so kind and generous, and you could ascribe all of these things, and yet none of those things are really the reason why you fall in love with someone, right? It's like, there have been plenty, I've felt, not to like have any of my exes catch strays right now, but it's like, they all have qualities that I'm like, what was I thinking, And yeah, I still fell in love with them. It's like, there's something beyond, it's kind of like, no one finds God or religion through logical argument. Same thing, like, you don't fall in love through logical argument. There's something else that arises that I think is separate from this artificial intelligence, right? And then I also had a thought about what you were saying with, like, should we eliminate trauma totally? And I think there's a really interesting comparison to the problem of evil in, like, religious philosophy that is, a lot of people would suggest that, well, because an argument against God is, then why would an all-good, all-knowing, all-perfect God create a world with so much suffering, create a world with so much pain? And a lot of people say, well, we experience pain because it's necessary for spiritual growth, for understanding some sort of truth about the nature of the world. And that's why God put us in this place for experiencing different traumas, and to actually have suffering is because there is some greater moral, spiritual good that comes out of that. And of course, there's still the issue of non-human suffering, like animal suffering seems to still be deeply problematic on this view, but just talking about humans, that is a common, like, theodicy that's used as to why we experience suffering and evil. And then a lot of people will say, okay, but if that's true, why can't it be just a little bit of suffering? Why do we have to have genocide and slavery and like these horrible worst crimes against humanity that have been experienced? Why can't it be on a smaller scale? And I don't have a good answer to that, right? Except for the depth of your pain may also equate to the depth of your compassion and love. But aside from that, I think, to speak to what you're saying, it's like if we were to play God a little bit and kind of try and set up a perfect parenting situation, if God is the perfect father, wouldn't it's like I can see how maybe as a parent you don't want to be the thing that is causing your kid to suffer, and that also seems problematic on this other religious thing. But in this situation, it's like when your kid is struggling to do something, you don't immediately run in and tie their shoes for them. You have them struggle and you let them learn and you let them grow, because it teaches them resilience and it teaches them I can do hard things and I'll be okay. You know, it's if your kid falls down and skins their knee, the thing that I was always taught growing up when I first started like babysitting or whatever, you know, when I was 13 or 14, it's like, don't immediately, oh my gosh, are you okay? And run over and check on the kid, because that'll freak them out more. It's like, oh, you're okay. You're good. You're fine.
They're looking to your reaction for...
Right.
Yeah. They want
and
your
normally
reaction,
they pop
right?
back
like,
up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even now, my daughter, 17 years old, and she still, like, looks to me for like assurance when something happens on the physical, you know, from a physical perspective. Well, and other perspectives, but it's just funny how you say that. It's like, well, I don't feel well. You know, like my stomach hurts, and she's looking to me like she got food poisoning 6 months ago, and you know, there's not much you can do as a parent, you know, most of the time with food poisoning. Like you could go to the hospital, but all they're going to do is they don't know any answers.
No, they'll probably just give you an IV.
Yeah, they'll give you an IV and charge you $2,000, and you'll be on your way, and it won't have done anything. But she's looking to me to see how I'm reacting, how she should react, and I wasn't reacting in I'm like, well, this sucks, but I looked it up. I did some sleuthing with ChatGPT in terms of what might have caused it. We came up with a pretty reasonable conclusion that, Occam's razor says it was. Here's what you can expect over the next 24 hours. And literally everything played out almost exactly like, the course of events. But because of my reaction to her, that's how she responded. So yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Like kids look to us to see, should I be scared? Because they don't know whether they should be scared or not. But when they see you scared, wow, that can send them off. And
totally.
And I don't, I think it's, I agree with you in terms of to me, the animals, the animal suffering is a very difficult argument. That this whole, we need to suffer. That's why a wonderful God, a perfect, good, omniscient, omnipotent God would allow suffering. I could buy that. I mean, I don't buy it, but I can get that argument for humans. But when it comes to animals, like, and
what's
then
the moral?
The counter, right. The apologetic counter to that are people who I study. I put that in quotes. Apologetics do. Would say, well, the animals will have a perfect after, God is just doing this and they're going to have a paradise afterwards. But again, to me, that's just a fucked up logic. Like, you don't, oh, don't worry about it. It'll all be I can't prove that, but it's all worth it in the end. Why do I have to go through hell to get this, as an animal?
Right.
Like, why is it okay for me to suffer so tremendously, maybe go extinct? Because there's some great thing waiting for me in the future. Like, I didn't consent to that, like
why not
you
just
could say
put them in paradise now?
Right. Like, why does there have to, again, assuming an all powerful God, like he could have done that if he were all powerful, which is, but again, that presupposes the omni God, which I simply just don't believe.
I agree.
Honestly, and no, I've never heard an argument that would convince me that were true. So I am curious. One of the things I did, the other thing that sort of our long thread ago brought up was really around is having, if you're in a relationship with somebody and they have or we'll look at it both ways, but they have an AI partner or an AI, whatever you want to call it, agent, friend, while they're in a relationship with you. Is that emotional cheating? So I think that's a question that her asks, right? Is falling for an AI a betrayal? Now, again, if you're in a relationship, is it different if you're not in a relationship? Because on one hand, I could argue Theodore wasn't ready for a human relationship at the time, after his divorce. He was not in a place where a human relationship would have worked for him. He was damaged. Did this now? Granted, he got dumped by the AI in the end, in some senses.
Yeah.
But what was that? Was that an acceptable bridge? Is one thing is it comes up for me. Another question is if he had been with his ex-wife, so they weren't getting a divorce, they were in a relationship, but he found this AI, is that cheating? At what point does it become cheating? Like, I'm curious what what your perspective is as a woman. If you had a partner, like, at what point would it be cheating? Does it matter if the voice is male or female to you? Like, so it's a male voice instead of a female. Because doesn't AI have a gender, really? Or is AI genderless?
Right.
I think
That's
AI is
earlier
is
when
non-binary,
you said,
to be honest. With you.
Right.
I mean,
when,
if there's a definition of non-binary, it's an AI. So
yeah, it's
so
a computer.
I'm throwing out a bunch of questions.
Even though computers all work in binary, which is so funny, but they're genderless, so non-binary, but binary code.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's a good joke.
There's some joke in there. I'll let a stand-up who understands the proper.
When we move to quantum computing, I think you could say that the AI is truly non-binary.
It's truly non-binary. That's
I don't know much about quantum computing, but I don't think I think it's more than binary, but I don't.
Right. I'll have to talk. A few of my friends are in coding, so I'm like, I'll have to see what joke they can make out of it. But I do think that. But like when you said earlier with like LGBTQIA people engaging with it, like, does the voice actually elicit some sort of gendered response or reaction? And I think it's interesting on that front because, with transgender identities and transitioning, now there are traditionally like masculine sounding voices and traditionally feminine sounding voices, and even the what do they call them? But there's like the gay voice is a thing too, right? And like Valley Girl voice, there are these voices that are, while gay voice is an effeminate masculine voice, it is definitely ascribed to that sexuality, even though of course those are generalizations. But I think as well as people at different points in their transitioning journey, we know that hormones can also change the way your voice sounds, but that doesn't change your gender. If you are a woman and your voice is still just deeper, that doesn't make you less of a woman. So I think there's some interesting gender questions tied up in this with the voice, right? If we get down to, does the gender actually matter there to someone? To me, not at all. That would be like saying, I think it's like if I had a boyfriend and they had this close relationship with an AI or an OS and it had a masculine voice, but there was some sort of emotional intimacy that felt like a betrayal to me, but it's like, oh, but he's straight, so it's fine. I would still have a problem with it. And I'll give an example to illustrate this. So in high school, or no, I guess it was the first Christmas after going to college, I was still with one of my high school boyfriends, and we were going to a New Year's Eve party with all of our old high school friends, because like first time everyone's home from college, there's a New Year's Eve party, and one of my girlfriends from high school, as girls of this age do, was like, oh, we should kiss, just kind of like jokingly or whatever. And I was like, oh, no, like I'm with my boyfriend, like I can't. it would be cheating, you know? And she was like, but you're straight. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Like, we can kiss and it won't be cheating. But in my mind, I was like, no, it's still infidelity, because even though we're not romantically entangled and it would be quote unquote joking, I'm like, just out of a respect thing for my boyfriend, like, I don't feel comfortable doing that, even though it wouldn't theoretically mean anything about our relationship. And we ended up having a conversation about it, and he was like, I wouldn't really care, like, it doesn't mean anything. And I was like, I get that, but like, I wouldn't like it if you, even as a straight man, ended up kissing one of your bros as a joke. And he was like, gross, I'd never do that, blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, come on. One of those
right
things. Right.
That response, and it's a pretty universal response, interestingly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
certainly among guys. And again, it goes to show our conditioning as a society as well. Like, why is two guys kissing gross? As the response you just dictated to, or relayed that, and I believe that response because I've made it before.
That's
myself.
the typical,
Like,
yeah.
It's there. And I would say it's my response nowadays is very, very different, but there's still like that. It's amazing, the conditioning, and it really is about deconditioning to your to these things, to see them for what they are and not see them as rules. It's interesting to me as a concept. Like, if you have, I liked what you said about emotional intimacy, because if you're pouring your heart out to an AI, who are you in the relationship with?
Yeah.
But then there's the question of, let's flip it around. I mean, we all know that again, being stereotypical, but men are less emotionally available. I think that's probably strong enough to be considered a generally accepted principle.
Yeah.
That men are less emotionally available than women on average. I mean, are there very emotionally
as
available
a generalization?
Men? Absolutely. But, on average, if you have somebody who's emotionally available, I'm going to say they're more likely to be a woman. Yeah, just in general. The odds are that they're going to be more likely to be a woman. And so, given that paradigm, men, again, stereotypical, but men may not be so great at handling emotions. Like, Theodore clearly was not able to handle his ex-wife's emotions. Like, we saw that so he failed as and so he goes to this AI who really doesn't put those emotional demands on him. And we sort of talked about that a little bit last week. But what if is an AI helper? So let's suppose in her that Theodore and his ex-wife were not exes, and the OS was marketed as an emotional companion. So she was able to use the AI for the emotional side, and therefore didn't feel like her needs weren't Theodore was able to meet the rest of her needs, but the AI was able to meet needs that Theodore couldn't meet.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Is that okay? Like, is there something wrong with that?
I think
would that be cheating?
It actually gets into a really interesting question of polyamory and friendship, because I think in our society we have really uplifted the idea of like someone not just completing you, which I think we're starting to unwork and unwind a little bit, that like, oh, you complete me, you're my other half. And it's like, no, I'm whole on my own. Do we help and assist and support each other? But we also hold up this idea of like someone else being your everything. My partner is my best friend. They're my intellectual sparring partner. They're my muse. They're my partner in crime. They're my favorite comedian. And it's like, okay, hang on. I don't have a single friend that is, and your partner is like your lover too, right? They're the person you find the most attractive and turns you on more than anyone else. Even removing that aspect of it, I'm like, I don't have a single friend that is someone that like we have the same humor, intellectually we're aligned, they perfectly get me. They serve all of these things that you want other people to support in your life. And we have this idea that our partner needs to check like all of these boxes. And that to me is just unreasonable. And I think that's why friendships and healthy friendships are so important for the health of relationships, because your partner may be your lover, right? And also your intellectual equal, and you have really great philosophical conversations, but they're just not that funny. And that's okay. Not everyone's a comedian. But you have a friend or two that really get your humor. And it's like, to me, that's not cheating, you know? But you are getting this emotional thing from these other relationships. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that actually makes you more available to be in your relationship, right? And I think the way that we've established relationships as a society are to be romantic, that like they are your physical partner. And like if you choose to have or raise kids, you're co-parent, right? That's also the other aspect of most relationships. But then, of course, those things are being parsed out too. We see divorced couples co-parent extremely successfully, even though they're no longer in partnerships. And like I mentioned, polyamorous couples that get their physical needs met elsewhere, open relationships that aren't even polyamorous. I guess polyamory is more about multiplying the emotional needs across different people as well as the physical needs, but open relationships that are like, I don't have any emotional needs from anyone else, but I'm getting these physical needs from other people. It just has to come down for I guess, a cop-out answer. It's like, well, it depends on your definition of cheating, which is a cop-out. But I think in any partnership, however you define that partnership, it really is about the clear communication of the expectations of the two people in that relationship. For me, if I were to ever get married, I think I have pretty high standards for that. But there are things that I'd be willing to sacrifice. Like, would it be awesome if my partner was really, really funny? Yes. Do I need to be able to have fun with my partner? Absolutely. Do they need to be the funniest person I know? No. But we need to align in some of these other ways that's like more important to me than them being my favorite comedian. And therefore, like, finding that in other avenues, I'm like, that wouldn't be cheating. But in the context of my relationship, if there are emotional needs that we've decided we're getting from each other, and then you start getting those needs from anywhere outside of the relationship, even if it's an online friend. I've heard a bunch of stories about people getting video game wives, that it's like you start talking with like someone that you're video gaming with across the world, and there's an emotional affair that happens through that, right?
Well, and I mean, even think work wives, right? That's a term,
right?
that's thrown out. I mean, what percentage of affairs are work wife? You know, sort of from work,
Yeah.
right? You know,
right.
If there's an affair, I mean, I don't know the number, but it has to be more than half.
Yeah.
You know, I would say it's probably, if I had to guess, 85% of
but
of affairs are because of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it just comes down to, is there an expectation of what you come to me for that now you're going to someone or something else for? That feels like cheating the boundaries of our relationship. Is there something that we are supposed to serve each other that you're now looking to someone else for without discussing with me and redefining the boundaries of this agreement? Like, even this is maybe a weird example, but like, if I recorded a podcast episode with someone else and put it out on the Bow Down podcast channel and didn't tell you, that would feel wrong and bad because it's like, it's a violation of our agreement, even though maybe we haven't explicitly said, like,
we haven't signed papers that are like, hey, this is,
right.
No, I get it. No,
it would be a violation of what we have kind of agreed to. And I think there's something similar there. And it's just higher stakes when it's someone that you're building a life with, right?
I agree. I think it's an interesting question, because, you know, and I think about like online dating now, or, you know, because a lot of people have relationships with people, long distance relationships. They met online, and it could be a year. And I mean, there's catfishing and all this other stuff that occurs.
Yeah.
But in some senses, in a relationship where where your primary vehicle of communication is, let's say, through text, and you're not talking very much, or even if you are, because AI is getting so good now, like AI can talk, and you might not know it wasn't. If not today, in 6 months, it'll be to the point where you don't know it's an AI, perhaps. But because I've seen some fakes that are pretty incredible already, and we're just at the tip of the iceberg of it. But really, I mean, is one of these, a long distance relationship, which is via text, where you're not really, you're talking a lot, like you're texting all night long, and it's this, I remember hearing of a case where it was basically an elderly gentleman, and he had an online relationship with this much younger woman, or woman, and I'll put that in quotes because it's not at all clear to me and anybody
Right.
else listening. Like they had this relationship for 5 years at least, and he would periodically send his online girlfriend, money.
Yeah.
And not, I mean, nothing more than, I don't think it was like taking him, making him broke or anything like
Right.
that.
Right.
But there were a lot of hints, and that this probably was a catfish example. The person that this because he was an elderly guy, he was in like assisted, a rehab, or an assisted living facility for veterans.
Sure.
Like he wasn't and his family, was really, his family was like, yeah, this is totally fake, and something happened where it really, really seemed like it was fake. But the scam, the alleged scammer was able to convince him again that no. But my question, yeah, and people are like, oh, that's so terrible, that's so. But here's the question, like, on some level, he has to know, based on the evidence that is accrued, that there's a good chance that this relationship is fake. Okay, like on some level. Now, consciously, he may not be willing to accept that. But here's my
Right.
question: even if we know it's fake, does that matter? Because what is he getting out of he's getting something out of this relationship. Is he
Yeah.
being scammed for real? And the same thing, and could that be, this relationship could be truly AI, right? I mean, now we're in a world where literally every response could be generated by ChatGPT. Like, if we're just doing text, I mean, and presumably you could do voice to, text to voice, so you could even have phone calls
Right.
with ChatGPT at some point. Where is there harm, and is the harm different if this were AI instead of a scammer? Does it matter? I don't know. These are just things that keep me up at night.
I do think the harm is different if it's a scam or if it's AI, because I think with AI, at least in the inception, if someone is actively choosing to, like, I know that this is AI and I'm like entering into some sort of emotional arrangement, it's like, well, then there's a conscious choice to know it's with an AI, but even if a scammer is using AI to generate messages, if there's a scammer who's like obviously trying to get money out of someone, whether they use AI or not, to me, that original intent is still harmful. But I do think there is a question of, it's almost like the red pill, blue pill matrix thing, right? And this was something, I think we talked about it after we stopped recording last week, but if we are living in a matrix, do you want to know and see the reality of the world, or would you like to just stay in the matrix? And both of us, I think, correct me if my memory is wrong, but we're like, I just could never consider a world where I wouldn't want to know the truth. Like, there's just something about my constitution that I'm like, I don't care if it brings me so much more pain. The idea that I could be living a lie, I'm like, the entire crux of my work and all of the questions that I ask and everything I research and all of the work that I produce is about pursuing truth and living in alignment with it. Like, I just couldn't, for me, I'm like, I don't get it. But I also understand that other people are built differently than that and feel differently. And you mentioned having someone in your life who was like, yeah, if I'm really happy it's okay if it's not totally true. And I even, one of my English teachers one time was asking us, you know, if our partner was cheating on us, like actually cheating on us, but we were perfectly happy in every way. The only thing is they're stepping out of the marriage and we just didn't know. Would you want to know, even though you know it's going to make you unhappy? Even though you know that fundamentally it's going to make you unhappy, you're going to go through pain, you're going to go through hurt, and if you didn't know, you would never know. You would never feel the pain of it, and you would never sense anything different in your marriage. I still think most people are like, no, I would want to know the truth, even though I know that that's going to cause me pain. But maybe there's some people out there that are like, no, if I'm happy and I don't sense, and I think 9 times out of 10 with cheating, you can usually sense something's wrong, there's been a shift in my partner, they're pulling away, blah, 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 blah. But if none of those signs were there, I think it comes down to that question of like, do you want to know the truth, even if the truth is more painful? And maybe it's just easier to say this hypothetically. I just can't imagine not wanting to know the truth, but I do think that there are people out there that would be better with the other one. And I think that's your choice that you get to make. If this old man, even if for me, it sounds like he's getting taken advantage of and it's sad that it's a lie, I'm like, he gets to choose to be blind to it if he wants to, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And actually, someone's getting is kind of like an emotional escort, right? Like someone's getting paid.
No, exactly right.
To
he's getting something out of it. Like I mean, and it's not like this person is. And again, I don't know the circumstance. It's just an interesting example of it. But this person is doing work to get this money. Right? I mean, you know, whatever the case is, the person is doing work to continue the illusion, if it is in fact an illusion, of the relationship. Like that's work. That's no different than I like the way you put it, an emotional escort. Like
yeah,
that's the thing.
And that's the thing with like OnlyFans now too, that people don't just pay for like the pornography, but they also pay to have like chats with these people, right? That like that is something they're willing to do too. There is something about like, I don't know if you would still call it sex work, but it's like the emotional side of sex work is also a thing. And it's like, if people are happy with that, even though there's something unreal, it's like, yeah, you're allowed to do that.
Yeah. I wonder what you're allowed. So everything is permissible, right? That's sort of is that idea, but is everything good, right? Is everything, everything that everything is permissible. But not all things are necessarily. I mean, so I agree with you. It's okay. It's perfectly fine. And in fact, I'm very libertarian in terms of my viewpoint of hey, if you know, ignorance can be bliss. You know, and on some level, I mean, unless somebody is mentally unable to you know, is not all there mentally. Like you're taking advantage of somebody who has dementia, and there was no evidence in the example I gave that this guy had dementia or something. You know, you know, he seemed to be in his right mind. You know, maybe he's making poor choices, but that's okay. I mean, he's allowed to do that. But you know, going back to the AI perspective, though, what is there a long-term ramification? Could technology replace women? Could it replace men? For you, given that given your orientation, maybe that's to you. So the question to me would be, could it replace women? Maybe to you, could it replace men? I mean, I don't know. Answer whatever comes up.
That's so interesting because I'm kind of could AI actually replace men in that it could fulfill all of the functions in society that men do?
From a relational perspective, from a relational, like what you would want in a partner perspective.
For me, there will always be like the physical component, right? There's that. But say you even take that out of it and it's just the emotional thing. I then agree with you about the energetic thing too, right? Like there is something about a partnership that is the kind of soul connection that is the part of it that is lovely, that I think is the piece of it that's the most divine to me. But also, and this may be just a me thing, but, well, no, I don't think it's just a me thing. I think that this is maybe just a more modern take. I would never look to AI for that, even if I couldn't find someone, because it's kind of like, I've very much reached a point in my life where it's like, if I never have another relationship and I never end up married and I never have kids, I'm okay with that because I like my own company. And for any relationship in my life at this point, friendship, romantic, any family member, I'm like, you have to be sweeter than my solitude because my solitude is pretty damn great. So if you're not adding to my life, and not to say that people can't be inconvenient, right? Like, community is inconvenient, humans are inconvenient, but we need to be uplifting one another. And if we're not doing that, peace. Like, I don't have the time or energy for someone who's going to make me feel less than. And therefore, it's like, could AI replace men? Maybe. Do I even want a replacement for men? Not really. I just kind of would like, in society, men to stop being violent towards women. And AI certainly wouldn't rape and murder women. So there is that thing that like comes up for me too, which is a little bit of a joke, but also because it's so not a joke.
That goes back to, would you rather be trapped with a bear or a man? Like that debate.
Yeah.
That sort of was it a bear? I think it was a bear.
Yeah.
Bear or a man that raged. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
Would you rather be trapped with a man or an AI? And I think
everyone would choose AI. Everyone would choose AI. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, as we sort of wrap up, one more thought I had, and you kind of sparked it, and you know, I'm curious. So towards the end of the film, there's the surrogate scene where Samantha the AI is talking with a real live woman who seems very into this, and so there's this awkward scene where you know, and it really begs the question. I mean, we talked about communication. Was this thorough? You know, it didn't feel like this. Felt like it was sprung on Theodore by Samantha to, hey, let's do this, and he wasn't ready for it, or he wasn't consenting to it. I guess the question is what did that bring up for you? Like, should he have been? I mean, obviously, I think communication should have been better, which is interesting.
Right.
Even with an AI, you didn't have like. It could have been, hey, I've been talking this. I'm really interested in this because, again, she wanted it for herself. I mean, it was a request that Samantha wanted to be able to somehow experience via, transference, the transitive property of, So, but was. I don't know. What did you think of that scene? Because I wish we had more time to talk about it because I know we're coming up towards the end here. But I'm curious what came up for you there, because it was an awkward scene. It was cringy. I cringed. Like I can say that.
Yeah,
emotionally,
it's a hard watch.
I felt a little icky. It was not a funny scene to me. I felt something. So I didn't like the scene. I felt uncomfortable. In many ways, actually, I felt uncomfortable for Theodore. But I also felt bad, if you can believe it, for Samantha, because I understood, her desires as well, like to be more than just, a voice, a voice on the,
Yeah, I think honestly for me, her desire to do that was the first time that I was like, oh, this is really when they're saying the AI is conscious, because for a really long time, Samantha is very much like, I kind of like that I don't have a body. I'm not bound by death like human beings are, right? But you do miss out on so much when you don't have a physical existence. I'm like, so many of the best things in life are like eating really good food and feeling like sand between your toes and the sensation of like swimming in the ocean, like all of these really cool things that a body allows us to have, including like physical intimacy with someone else that I guess Sam and Theodore kind of have, but obviously it's not traditional. For me, it was like, oh no, she is conscious, and that's really where it's pushing the boundaries into like science fiction that I don't think we'll ever really get there with AI, where an AI would like offer something like this up, because that takes a certain level of awareness. And the communication thing too, right? That's like Theodore clearly agreed to it because Sam wanted it. They needed to communicate about that better. And I do think more than just Sam wanting to have a body, it was also about wanting a body to connect with Theodore in a physical way. Like wanting to be able to relate to someone in a physical way. Like you brought up the example of a long distance relationship. I did long distance for a year in college, and it is different being with your person in person than over FaceTime, even if you're just eating dinner and you happen to be across the booth from one another, not talking, versus across a phone. There is something different. And I think that that is like, Sam not only wanted to figure out what that difference is for herself, she wanted to give Theodore the experience of physically connecting with her in that way. But you just can't, because you can't transfer her consciousness to this other woman that was the surrogate in this scene, unless eventually one day that's a thing that they could do. But that also seems weird and Black Mirror-y. But yeah, I think wanting a body, it's kind of like the constraints of AI that, like, if you had this consciousness, there is something so magical about the way that our physical body interacts with the non-physical, and we don't have an explanation for it. We don't know how our consciousness, how our mind engage. It's the mind-body dualism problem, the hard problem of consciousness that AI can't solve either.
Yeah, I love that. And I do wonder if this was, again, sidestepping the consciousness non-consciousness piece, because again,
Sure.
we have no, I don't know the answer there. I'm a little more on the side of it could happen, because there's a part of me that and this probably is the more rational side of me that says, well, listen, I mean, at the end of the day, our thoughts are just electrical impulses, basically zeros and ones firing through neurons. Why is there something about that what there's magic there? So theoretically it could occur, and so I'm a little more wait and see on it. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely don't have a hard line. It could never happen. But I mean, to me, perhaps Samantha wanted. Why would she want this? Is the question. Again, forgetting about consciousness, because you're right. I mean, that's a rabbit hole we could spend a lot of time on. But
Right.
I like to think, I guess, that she could generate, right, 500 different scenarios of intimacy with Theodore herself, right? But none of them, she's creating all of them by having a surrogate, a real human being, and seeing what this real human being's response is. This gives her something that she didn't create. So it almost is like her imagination. She's taking on the imagination of somebody else. Like, so rather than her having to imagine something, she's able to. Again, it's the difference between fantasizing and doing something with a person. No matter how you fantasize, it's different. A real person is going to do things differently. No matter what no matter what you had in mind, there is something more fulfilling, at least I find it this way, to interact with another human being where you don't know the answer to the thing. And the AI to me is just doing that. So Samantha's like, well, I could make my own scenario. I could have 100,000 scenarios, but all of these are me creating them. I want something I didn't create. I want something outside of myself. And I don't know. I like to think maybe that's why she did it, but it was an uncomfortable scene, and I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder how other people see that, and again, listeners, we'd love to know, like, how you feel. Like, what are we
Yeah.
missing? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? I
Totally.
don't think there's right answers here, and I guess I'll just ask: would you? So I'll leave with this, because I know we're running out of time here, but. So Reese sort of alluded to this earlier, but I am curious, like, if you knew, going back to the red pill, blue pill sort of thing, would
Right.
you take the red pill, or would you take the blue pill if you knew If taking the blue pill meant you would never know that you were in the Matrix, and
Right.
taking, of course, taking the blue pill means you never know, just like they said in the movie. You take the red pill, then you know your full revelation. Now you know what the truth is, though. So when you're making this decision, it's not, oh, I'm learning something I don't know. You know what doing the red pill. You know everything that will happen to you if you take the red pill. Would you still do it? Is the question. Because, Neo in the movie did not know what the red pill really meant. It was just truth dangled out in front of him. No different than religion, right? That's what, how is that different than Christianity? Yeah. Like, hey, take Jesus, take to Jesus and call me in the morning, and you've made it to eternal life.
Which is interesting because the red pill is also kind of like fruit from the tree of knowledge, right? That actually Adam and Eve weren't supposed to eat from because they would die. And I guess they, there's so many different apologetic arguments for how they actually did die and all of the things, but they don't die, but right. Yeah. And I'll just underline, Dennis means red pill. Do you take the red pill or blue pill in the traditional Matrix sense, not the Reddit incel gross. Yeah. Not that. No. Just for anyone wondering.
I hate the fact that that's been
I know
taken
commodified and
because it's such a good movie and it's such a good analogy for life. To have it taken up by a bunch of incels is a shame, but I want to take it back, damn it.
It's ours. Give us the red pill back.
So I wonder, what people think. I'd love to hear from others, like who would choose truth, the red pill, the reality, the ugly reality over the beautiful falsity, the beautiful illusion.
Well, even I think the cheating example is a good way to illustrate it in a very real sense, right? To really make it real for yourself. Would you want to know if your partner's cheating on you or not? But yeah, for sure, let us know in the comments wherever you're listening or watching. Tag us if you're talking about it on social media at the Cohere Collective, #BowDown. Let us know, and thank you for engaging with us, for being here. Dennis, thank you as always
this was great.
Your thoughtful conversation, and
I feel like we could talk another 3 weeks. We could talk another 3 weeks on this topic, but we probably won't. We have so many other things to do. So, but maybe we'll revisit it as AI continues to change. So, thank you, everyone. We love you. We love the fact that you're you because you're awesome. And as always, Reese, you're even more awesome, Queen. So have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
And can't wait till the next time we talk.
Bow Down is a weekly podcast from the Cohere Collective that explores esoteric and empowered feminism.
Please subscribe to Bow Down wherever you may be listening. And if you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a like, a 5-star rating, and a review. And if there's anyone you think would enjoy this episode, or maybe just needs to hear it, please share it.
If you want to stay up to date on all things Bow Down, you can follow the Cohere Collective on any social media platform at the Cohere Collective, and check out other content and offerings at www.thecoherecollective.com.
If you're interested in working with Reese to find and pursue your purpose, I encourage you to head to www.thecoherecollective.com/life-coaching.
If you're interested in working with Dennis to shed your mask and embrace your desires, you can email Dennis at dennis@theheartstoybox.com.
A huge thank you to Jack Corbett for Bow Down's music. You can find him on Instagram at j.corbe. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so glad you're here.
And as always, we hope you feel like you are living more coherently. And until next time, love.